Good morning, students. Today we are going to continue with our chapter The Sound Machine by Roald Dahl. By the end of the video, you will be able to explain the meanings of the difficult words according to the text, tell about figures of speech that we will read in the text, and explain the text in your own words. So, before we start reading further, let us first recapitulate what we have read so far. Till now we have read how on a warm summer evening Klausner goes into a shed in his garden where there was a black box that looked like a child's coffin. Klausner started his work on the box. He tested the connections of the wires and referred to the paper on and off. This went on for about an hour. As Klausner was working, Dr. Scott, his friend, walked in. He wanted to check Klausner's throat, but Klausner was not interested in this. He was continuously working on his new machine. So finally, the doctor asked him what he was working on. Klausner explained to the doctor the theory that the human ear was not able to hear all the sounds, especially the sounds that were either high-pitched or low-pitched. The human ear was unable to hear a note with more than 15,000 vibrations a second. He then gave the example of a dog and then of a fly to help the doctor understand his theory of sounds. But the doctor was not convinced, right? So by the end, the doctor had wished him good luck. He thanked his patient for letting him know about his invention, and then he went away. So as the doctor went away, Klausner started working on his machine again. Now let us continue with the reading. Open your book The Echoes, a collection of ISC short stories at page number 105. First of all, note down the meanings of the difficult words. Cog means to hold up a part of the body. Tense means serious. Attitude is the way you think, feel or behave. Knob is a round handle. Spasmodic, happening suddenly for a brief period of time. Crackling means a series of short sounds. Okay students, now let us start with our reading. And now he was bending forward over the machine. He here refers to Klausner. The doctor had left and Klausner was again busy with his machine. His head was cocked to one side in a tense listening attitude. You must have noticed the same thing when we are not able to listen to something which is very low in sound. We also cock our head in one side trying to listen to something inaudible. His right hand was beginning to turn the knob. The knob here is the round button on the machine. The needle was traveling slowly across the dial, so slowly he could hardly see it move. And in the earphones he could hear a faint spasmodic crackling. So here Klausner is carefully tuning his machine so that he could hear those distant sounds around, and then he heard some faint crackling. Now let us do the meanings of the next paragraph. Humming means low continuous sound. Conscious means aware. Curious means strange. Stiff is firm. Tentacles, one of the long thin soft parts like legs that some sea animals have. Forbidden, not allowed. Shriek is a shrill sound or it is a shout. Frightful means fearful. Behind the crackling sound he could hear a distant humming sound which was the noise of the machine itself. So as Klausner has put on his headphones and is trying to listen to the sounds, he noticed some sounds, one of which was of the machine only. But that was all. So he couldn't hear any more sounds. As he listened, he became conscious of a curious sensation, a feeling that his ears were stretching out away from his head, that each ear was connected to his head by a thin stiff wire like a tentacle, and that The ears were going up and up towards the secret and forbidden territory, a dangerous ultrasonic region where ears had never been before and had no right to be. So you can see how eager he is to listen to those sounds that he felt his ears were moving away from him. They were going far, very far, looking for those distant sounds. The little needle crept slowly across the dial, and suddenly he heard a shriek, a frightful, piercing shriek. And he jumped and dropped his hands. Catching hold of the edge of the table, he stared around him as if expecting to see the person who has shrieked. There was no one in the sight except the woman in the garden next door. And it was certainly not she. She was bending down, cutting yellow roses and putting them in her basket. So here, finally, Klausner heard a scream, a very sharp shriek, as if somebody was in pain. But Klausner couldn't see any human being around. There was only one woman, and she was also busy cutting roses. And that scream wasn't hers. So now let us do the meanings of the next paragraph. Inhuman means frightful. Instinctively means based on feelings. Snip means cut down. Scream is a loud cry. Again it came, a throatless, inhuman shriek, sharp and short, very clear and cold. The note itself possessed a minor metallic quality that he had never heard before. Klausner looked around him, searching instinctively for the sources of the noise. The woman next door was the only living thing in sight. He saw her reach down, take a rose stem in the fingers of one hand, and snip the stem with a pair of scissors. Again he heard the scream. It was at the exact moment when the rose stem was cut. So Klausner heard the shriek again, and it seemed that the painful scream wasn't of a human being. It looked a little inhuman. He then noticed that next scream came exactly when the woman cut the rose stem. And as she was about to leave, Klausner called her to stop. Now let us do the meanings. Lawn means garden and alarmed means alert. At this point, the woman straightened up, put the scissors in the basket with the roses and turned to walk away. Mrs. Saunders, Klausner shouted, his voice shrill with excitement. Oh, Mrs. Saunders, so what is the name of the neighbor? Mrs. Saunders. So I've told you, when she was about to leave, Klausner called her. And looking round, the woman saw her neighbor standing on his lawn, a fantastic arm-waving little person with a pair of earphones on his head, calling to her in a voice so high and loud that she became alarmed. It startled her. He shouted Mrs. Saunders so loudly that she was startled. Cut another one, please, cut another one quickly. She stood still, staring at him. Why, Mr. Klausner? She said. What's the matter? Please do as I ask, he said. Cut just one more rose. So, when the woman heard that someone was calling her, she looked around and saw Klausner telling her to cut another rose. Startled at this, she asked him what was the matter, and Klausner again requested her to cut another rose. Now let us do the word meanings of the next paragraph. Peculiar means strange. Fetch means called. Snipped means cut down. Frightful means fearful. Shriek is a shrill sound or a shout. Mrs. Saunders had always believed her neighbor to be a rather peculiar person, a strange person, because he's a scientist, so he looked strange. Now it seemed that he had gone completely crazy. She wondered whether she should run into the house and fetch her husband? No, she thought. No, he's harmless. I'll just humor him. I'll just humor him means I'll do what he says. Certainly, Mr. Klausner, if you like, she said. She took her scissors from the basket and bent down and snipped another rose. Again Klausner heard that frightful throatless shriek in the earphone. Again it came at the exact moment the rose stem was cut. He took off the earphones and ran to the fence that separated the two gardens. All right, he said, that's enough. No more. Please, no more. So, according to Mrs. Saunders, Klausner was indeed a strange man. She thought of running into her house and calling her husband, but then she thought he was harmless, and thus she got ready to comply to his request. And the moment she cut another rose, Klausner again heard the shriek exactly when the rose was cut. Now let us do the word meanings. Clippers means scissors. Screamed means shouted. Terrible means very unpleasant. Peered means looked. The woman stood there, a yellow rose in one hand, clippers in the other, looking at him. I'm going to tell you something, Mrs. Saunders, he said. Something that you won't believe. He put his hands on top of the fence and peered at her intently through his thick spectacles. He was looking at her. You have this evening cut a basket full of roses. You have with a sharp pair of scissors cut through the stems of the living things, and each rose that you cut screamed in the most terrible way. Did you know that, Mrs. Saunders? So here he is asking Mrs. Saunders if she knew she had cut some living beings. It's a sort of murder. So here Klausner went to Mrs. Saunders and tell her that roses, the living beings, were shrieking when she cut them. Now let us do the meanings. Approximately means nearly. Dash means ran into. No, she said, I certainly didn't know that. It happens to be true, he said. He was breathing rather rapidly, but he was trying to control his excitement. I heard them shrieking. Each time you cut one, I heard the cry of pain, a very high-pitched sound, approximately 132,000 vibrations a second. You couldn't possibly have heard it yourself, but I heard it. So with what was Klausner able to hear those sounds? With the help of his new invented machine. Did you really, Mr. Klausner? She decided she would make a dash for the house in about 5 seconds. So here Mrs. Saunders, who had always thought Klausner to be a strange man, decided to run back to her home because Klausner's words that the roses were shrieking when she cut them startled her. Now let us do the next meanings. Leaned means bent. Fierce means angry. Whisper means to speak in a very low voice or to speak quietly. Shears, a tool that is like a very large pair of scissors. You might say, he went on, that's a rose bush, has no nervous system to feel with, no throat to cry with. You would be right, it hasn't. Not like ours anyway, but how do you know, Mrs. Saunders? And here he leaned far over the fence and spoke in a fierce whisper. He is very serious while he is talking about sounds with his neighbor also. How do you know that a rose bush doesn't feel as much pain when someone cuts its stem in two as you would feel if someone cuts your wrist off with a garden shears? How do you know that? It's alive, isn't it? So here Klausner explained her that the rose bush shrieked whenever it was cut. He says that she might think that a rose bush has no nervous system or a throat to express pain. But how can she think that a rose bush doesn't feel pain? when we cut its stem. He further added that the pain of the rosebush was same like the pain that she would feel if someone cuts her wrist, because the rosebush is also a living thing. Now, the meaning of faint is weak. Crackling means a series of short sounds. Humming means to make a continuous low sound. Let us read further. Yes, Mr. Klausner, oh yes, and good night. Quickly she turned up and ran up the garden to her house. So she only wanted to put an end to the conversation. She wanted to escape from there. So she quickly wished a good night and ran away. Klausner went back to the table. He put on the earphones and stood for a while listening. For a short period of time. He could still hear the faint crackling sound and the humming noise of the machine, but nothing more. He bent down and took hold of a small white daisy growing on the lawn. So daisy is the name of a flower. He took it between the thumb and forefinger and slowly pulled it upwards and sidewards until the stem broke. So, when Mrs. Saunders left, Klausner again went back to his machine, but he couldn't hear anything. So he took a daisy in his hand and broke it. And again, he heard a shriek. Distinctly means clearly, inanimate means non-living, stony means no feeling, toyner's pearl or plinacment means didn't understand what they were crying for. For the moment that he started pulling to the moment when the stem broke, he distinctly heard in the earphones. Distinctly means very clearly. A faint, high-pitched cry, curiously inanimate, means it did not belong to a human being. He took another daisy and did it again. Once more he heard the noise, but he wasn't sure now that it expressed pain. No, it wasn't pain. It was surprise. Or was it? It didn't really express any of the feelings or emotions known to a human being. It was just a cry, a neutral, stony cry. A single emotionless note expressing nothing. It had been the same with the roses. He had been wrong in calling it a cry of pain. A flower probably didn't feel pain. It felt something else which we didn't know about. Something called tom or spun or plinacment or anything you like. So, when Klausner pulled the daisy, he heard a shriek. So he pulled another daisy and obviously he again heard a shriek which did not belong to a human being. So he pulled it and broke it. But then he realized that the shriek was not of pain. Actually, it did not depict any of the human emotions. So children, I hope you have understood what we have read so far. Reread these pages and plan pages 108, 109 and 110. Thank you.